We can start, huh? Welcome back to a new panel named Politics of Media, Trump, Brexit, and Failed Representation in Media. Our participants are Danica Ilić from Ethical Journalism Network, Alissa Quart from Economic Hardship Reporting Project, and Milan Živković, former Special Advisor to the Minister of Culture of the Republic of Croatia. I'm going to start with keep it simple, stupid, basic journalistic question. It's in a way irritating to ask that, but I think it's really important to answer it. Where are the medias today and what are the medias? Whom do we believe when we are just regular readers? Go.
Yeah. It's a really difficult question, actually. And I think maybe we should rephrase it. I'm not sure whether we do believe in media, because that, and maybe that's why we have all these initiatives for building trust in the media. Since we lost trust in the media, in the mainstream media, due to this linear, pretentious, arrogant reporting and kind of above position that they implied onto us, we, when I say we, meaning ordinary people, workers, we wanted to create a space where we can have our own media. So in a way, we changed from being just consumers of information to also producers. Prosumers, there's an academic word for that.
Right.
Yeah, but then we screwed that up as well, because we didn't know how to do it better. Because what we did, we just kind of adopted the same structure of, okay, I have a YouTube channel as a, I don't know, producer of the content. And then I am going to tell you what is, for instance, this information in the Eurasia region is about, without really applying that interactive or kind of more listening concept into the media concept of, okay, let's have media to inform, to educate, some would say entertain, but also I believe that now we should talk about involving the fourth principle is, let's have a media who work in a public interest. So if I, as a producer of the media content want to be more inclusive, then I have to open my door, whether it is my YouTube channel or Twitter account, or is a local news outlet portal. So I still think that it's closed, and that's why there is still, I believe, lack of trust in the media.
Thank you. Alissa?
Well, you know, I don't know, in the US it's been a specific case in certain ways because it's been, you know, we have a president who is constantly tweeting that, you know, media lies, inciting people to harm journalists, and that's actually caused, you know, potentially attacks on journalists. And so we're in a context now where there's like a lot of distrust. I mean, in the U.S. it goes back a ways. I mean, there hasn't always been faith in reporting. And, you know, sometimes, honestly, I do think, and this is some of the stuff I touched on there, the top-down nature of a lot of news organizations helps build that distrust. And I still think it's coming from, you know, Trump and other white nationalists, and it's been incited. But part of what we've done is we've created a journalism that doesn't necessarily represent where most people are at, that's tone deaf sometimes. And after the election, reporters were sent out to Pittsburgh, you know, oh, go have a beer for 2 hours with a Trump voter, right? And that was the closest they were gonna get to like the real America. So I think that if I was if I lived in that America, I mean, even me being this kind of coastal elite, I feel alienated by it. It's like, that's, you know, that you don't know these people's experience. This isn't lived in, this isn't inhabited. So I think that's one of the ways to earn back the trust, is to try to get those voices speaking through the mainstream. But yeah.
Milan, you are not a journalist, but you did a lot for non-profit medias in Croatia during your work with in the Ministry of Culture of Croatia. So tell us your experience and what, from your perspective, also as a reader, as a consumer of media, where are the medias now? Where, especially in Croatia, yeah.
Well, what happened to the media can really be boiled down to economic crisis and technological change, really. Once we considered sort of normative relation between news media and the market. It took market independence to develop quality news media. That was so-called ideology of professional journalism. But over the time, it turned that was a rather brief historical episode of coincidence between high advertising income and quality journalism. Intense economic growth after the World War II was bringing brigades of industrial labor force to the cities, and these people, our parents, they were literally swallowing huge media content, everything the news media could produce at the time, and of course that content was inserted with lots of advertising, used to sell to these new middle classes industrial products, cars, furniture, television sets, refrigerators, and so on. And they were buying all of that, and that was fueling economic growth. And eventually, the owners of the news media accumulated huge surpluses. And eventually, they decided, even some small part of these surpluses, to invest in quality journalism, into investigative journalism, and which created, these big victories of journalism in 20th century, as we remember it, as we still from time to time watch it in these huge Hollywood dramas about journalists fighting injustices, discovering corruption, installing governments, bringing governments down, and so on and so on. The series of economic crises, starting with this 1970s, separated with maybe brief periods of sluggish economic growth, put an end to that relationship between capitalism and quality journalism. I think that was the beginning of the story. Later on, to make things much worse for the news media and for the journalism, enters internet. Not because internet was somehow a problem for journalists. It's a huge tool for journalists. When you it's much easier to work once you have internet connection, but it's good for the media owners too, because they can distribute newspapers, they can distribute their content practically immediately and at practically no price. But the problem was that problem is that they really cannot they cannot make money from that. And advertising is not ending, is not inserted in that content. As we all know, advertising and advertising money, they are all going to this to machinery of this platform economy. Targeted individualized ads. So complete loss of advertising income, created that situation that we practically don't have real journalism in the commercial media. Oh, okay, I agree that it will always exist in some niche here or there, but generally, if you are looking for journalism now, you need to look you need to search for it in non-profit sector.
Okay, let's get dramatic. I think Alissa used the syntagma war on journalism, and I would spread that idea and tell that if it's war on journalism, it's war on journalists.
Yeah.
And if you're a poor journalist, that means that you don't have a gun, that you don't have tools to fight against, that you don't know and you don't have means to defend yourself and your work. Can you tell us something about that? I mean, I know it's a metaphorical question, but
the war on journalists,
I'm sorry, I just want to share one experience. When I started working in journalism, which was basically when I started going to college, nobody believed me that when you work for the mainstream media, that still doesn't mean that you can pay your bills and pay your rent, because and that lasts for the last 15 years already, in my experience. So
but I did want to address something you said because I felt that as I was saying in my talk earlier, I think it's very important to try to participate with very commercial media. So, because that's where a lot of people are getting where they're at. So, and I don't totally agree that the most commercial spaces are vacant. For instance, Teen Vogue is a case study. Does everyone knows Vogue? Teen Vogue, right? You think Teeny Bopper magazine, right? They become this radical, I kid you not, it's like a radical site. And we are getting so much work into Teen Vogue from EHRP. We're doing our third piece with them. I don't know who it's reaching exactly, but I assume it's activist teenagers. And to me, that's the kind of, if I was publishing with The Nation or The Times, that's not who I'd be reaching in that same targeted way. So I think, because we're a nonprofit, we can give people money to do a proper treatment. But some of those commercial partners are really good because they know how to get audiences. So I don't want to give up on them. I feel like the stories we've gotten into Elle or Cosmo, Refinery 29, which is like a fashion site. First of all, I'm really into fashion, so I'm like, I might be just be going looking for a sale or something. And so I'm like, okay, somebody's looking at this and suddenly they're thinking about garment workers. This is good, right? Anyway, back to your question, war on journalists. For us, it's an economic war, right? It's people who are being forced out, who can't write anymore. But there's all these other wars, right? There's the Trumpian war. There's the lack of trust war on journalists. And I think for female journalists, that's a whole other question. There's a gender war. Almost anyone I know if you ever publish anything on abortion, on rape, on harassment, you will get hate mail or death threats. It's like the trolls are out. I don't know what it's like here, but
it's very the same.
Yeah. I mean, it's that too, my husband worked on the Snowden archives. The one time that he got death threats in the last couple of years was when he published something on a Benghazi movie saying it was toxic, evil masculinity. And then hundreds, death threats, you cuck, all this stuff, right? If I publish anything about abortion, I've gotten death threats, I've now executive produced 3 films on abortion and wrote one of them, and, 2 of them were Emmy nominated, so they were public. Yeah, and that's terrifying. And that's, so if you add on to that this economic uncertainty, it is a war. So how do we fight it? That's some of the questions, right? We assume that journalists are being attacked, but how do we give them more protection?
Mm-hmm. Danica?
I'm thinking now, I'm not sure whether I'm right, but we give them protection in a way that we kind of get together and give them support, and what you do, give them space and give them opportunity and work from them and money. Help them, and money and help them, that kind of individual one-to-one basis. You help an individual.
Yeah.
And and that is the real thing. In the same time, I need to be a little bit more critical about the media and journalists themselves. And us, I am a journalist, you're a journalist. So in a way, we drove ourselves in this situation because we were, in a way, pretentious and ignoring certain issues and ignoring communities in Pittsburgh.
And nationalism.
And exactly.
Nationalism and all these
Yeah, and just trying to sustain, to keep the structure that was so close to the main power so that we can be closer because power drives you,
The term they use in the US is access journalism.
So,
Yeah.
So you two basically helped raise of the right-wing movements.
in a way,
in the West. Okay.
and Brexit,
Okay.
which is a trap in many ways. And the way, again, I'm coming to British media. The way British media reported on Brexit is a classic trap, and we are responsible for that. And I do also find myself responsible for not digging deeper and finding all these narratives that I should have been presenting to the Serbian audience, because I report for Serbian audience, without following the same pattern. Labour said this, Tories said this, and now you voters vote. Well, what's my job? Because they can find that on websites of Labour and Conservative Party.
Rise of right-wing movements in Croatia started when, with the economic crisis, or how do you detect it? And when you started working on the non-profit media policies, were they strong that much, or did they become stronger after the failure of the last elections?
Well, we remember that first time in Croatia, the radical right wing came practically into power at the beginning of 2016, so 3 years ago. That was coming of the right wing into establishment. But we can remember that since the beginning of 90s, there was a climate which was like inviting for the developing of the right wing movements here or there. But in 2016 they were effectively in power, and I think that moment is really important to understand their relationship to the media, which is different. If we talk about mainstream media, and we talk about their relationship to right-wing relationship to public television, for example, or major news printed news outlets, and their relationship to the non-profit media. What was their problem with the establishment, with the mainstream media? The problem was that since the World War II, they were really pushed on the margins of society, where they belong, I believe. But now when they are once actually in the government, or really fighting, seriously fighting in elections in many European countries and in America. So the last thing that completes, somehow finishes the project of their rehabilitation in social mainstream is really changing their picture in mainstream media. So that's why they are interested into taking over the major mainstream news outlets. So that's their interest, to be clear. On the other hand, when they decided to practically kill all small funding opportunities for the non-profit media professionals or any sort of non-profit journalism, well, I think that here we confront with quite old right-wing intolerance for the informed citizenship. They really notice that here or there you have some small non-profit media who will really tell the facts. You know, right wing is always building their stories from maybe some facts, but interpreted in very wrong way. You know, with
Fictionalized.
a lot of imagination, and you know they develop stories which people can really trust. And when you have, however small, professional journalism in some non-profit regime here or there, it is always dangerous that someone will deconstruct your story about national history. I don't know what. And that's why they really strongly hate non-profit journalism, because they hate informed citizens. I think that is the problem with right wing or alt-right, or I don't know, post-fascism, however you want to call that.
Very well informed mainstream medias in the West lost their war on Trump and Brexit. That's true. Like, nobody believed them, and they voted for Trump. They voted for Brexit. Like, even though real big mainstream medias who are we now trying to get our belief back, they lost it.
They didn't believe that people would vote for Trump or Brexit. I mean, part of it, we didn't, as media workers.
They were out of touch.
Yeah, it's a total disconnect, yeah.
So what do we do with that? How do we then, like, tell to that imaginary public that, okay, if you don't believe to the mainstream media who are really there for you every day, you can't, as a non-profit media, be there for them every day because you can't fund that. How do you tell them, how do you educate them to believe in a non-profit media? Why would they believe you and not to the mainstream?
Maybe because you offer something different, something more. For instance, I wanted to say, when you came to the Brexit thing, you know, they didn't have, the reporters on Brexit didn't have Bill and Melinda Gates, who are paying in The Guardian to support and to fund reports from Africa about the poverty. Without that foundation, you wouldn't have those reports in The Guardian, which is, you know, a rural media outlet in the UK. But if you have non-for-profit media that report differently, that just differently, and opening up the issues and topics that you can't find in other outlets, I believe that could be a way. The other thing is, who is going to pay? Who is going to pay? Who is going to pay for non-for-profit media? Because if the audience is not paying, I'm sorry to the participant who raised the question about a paywall, and if you don't have this membership business model, then some foundation needs to pay, as a good guy from eBay is paying for The Intercept, or Bill and Melinda, or we'll have a fund from Foreign Office to support, you know, a fight on fake news coming from Russia. So we're still about the money. Mm-hmm. And whether is it moral to take the money because we do a good thing, mm-hmm. and how much we take?
Okay, answer us
well,
the question.
No, but see,
is it moral?
I can tell you, I mean, I raise, this is transparent, I raise $700,000 a year for my organization. And so it is a constant process of trying to get money and we mostly raise it from foundations, which makes it a little easier, I mean, morally, because they're a little more value neutral. It's like Ford Foundation, Open Society, you know, Soros, and other groups like that. But, you know, there's still, there's a lot of critique. There's critique of your donors sometimes. There's about things that they've done. There's I mean, I think one of the things with the foundation thing is also you have to protect yourself a little from trying to, I don't know how to shape the things you assign so they fit the pet interests of the donor. So that's another issue. That's less of a corruption issue and more like a aesthetic or journalistic issue. Like, do you want to wind up doing a lot of I'm making this up, but coverage of pets because your donor is a pet, as an animal lover, whatever, or you know, whatever their pet interest is. So I think that's a risk. And then, I mean, I've always thought, why not, especially with local reporting, we should have local governments participating in that, because it would be a sign of good faith and battling their own corruption and transparency. And I think there's some states where that's actually happened, and there's some towns. My students this year were doing a whole project on that, and they'd found some small cities where there was money set aside for municipal reporting. But I mean, I think also a lot of municipalities don't want that because they don't want their dirty laundry aired out, so they're not going to want to support. So it's not just money, you know. But the money right now in America in the nonprofit journalist sector, it is there. And there has been a real push, and this is also problematic, to try to have nonprofits be hybrids that raise revenue. So you're supposed to have workshops and festivals, and my joke is I've run a poverty project. I'm not going to be doing workshops in Barbados for people to learn how to write on poverty. But I mean, if you are running a nonprofit that has some touchy-feely self-help element, you can have a retreat and then raise money that way, or you know, it's almost like this kind of thing. Galas, I mean, a lot of these journalism nonprofits have these galas where they raise millions. To me, that in some ways is more problematic than raising it from foundations.
For me, sorry, I'm just going quickly because Milan is ready to answer. But for instance, you have Google News Lab that is giving money away without asking you anything. You can do whatever you want. I'm just giving you money and I'm a Google. How morally problematic is that? And in the same time, they will offer you fact-checking, location verification tools, modern tools, and obviously they are on top of the game. They have all these shiny things. And then you are non-for-profit, or you want to kind of produce a quality journalism, and they're really not giving you any you don't have to follow any kind of editorial policy or anything, but it's just Google money. So.
Well, I would not object to Google's money if it was collected by tax authorities. When it is just a generous donation by the Google executives, that's really nothing. Please don't mention it as a source of funding for journalism. But you know, when we confronted that question of who will pay for journalism, really, which is, I believe, the basic question of any real practical media policy. First of all, we saw that, as you said yesterday, someone really is missing from that table where you discuss media policy. And you know who was missing? Journalists. Journalists were really missing from any media policy conversation in this country.
That's interesting.
Maybe it will sound too good that 5 or 7 years later, some things have changed, and many journalists now in Croatia are more active in media policy issues. But that was the time where media policy was decided really in very small circle of government's executives and media owners, really. Maybe some mid-level management from telecommunication, and that was it. So you know, because that person who presents you the information, that's very important, because they are giving you the context, and the context is that what is giving the meaning to the information. You know, it's very different if some event, for example, a strike, is presented from the angle of the owner of the factory, or presented from the angle of the labor union activists actually being in strike. It's completely different meaning of the same event, of the same fact. And you know, when they are talking about journalism, everyone is talking about, you know, bringing the facts to the public, and that will be the good journalism. But you know, the presenting the facts in context is really most important for the meaning of these facts. And I'm not talking about commentary. I'm talking about just about reporting. I mean, boots on the ground journalism. And if you are thinking about journalism, and if you are thinking about funding of journalism, and media policy in general, that really depends on who is the subject of that journalism. And what we were trying to do, we were trying to learn the journalists' stories, to learn their perspectives, what happened to journalists over that huge story of deconstruction of traditional media. You know, first of all, probably half of them, exactly half of them in Croatia, were not, at a certain moment, they were not journalists anymore. They lost their jobs. 50% of the journalist workforce was out of employment. The rest of them, they confronted growing, rising precarization, less pay, worsening of working conditions, you know, despecialization, you know, losing the opportunity to develop, you know, your expertise in following certain beat of, you know, economy or culture or I don't know what, but being constantly asked to produce articles or content on just everything from the fashion or gastronomy to politics and so on. And at the same time, you know, this killing practically, you know, but at the same time being asked to develop multiple skills of being able to not just write articles, but to edit sound, shoot photographs, and probably all of that during the prolonged work day for smaller paycheck. So that was practically the situation of these journalists. They were forced constantly to build their brand really on that market. I mean, they were forced to present themselves as very busy and successful, while being available for hire at every single moment. Really, you know, that sort of pressure, you know, developed them into producers of that amorphous media content.
But
that's why I'm
can I play devil's advocate though?
Sorry?
Can I play devil's advocate? What is wrong with being an amorphous content provider?
Because turning media into these factories of content.
But no, I understand that, but I
it's in the service of cutting the cost.
I know where it comes from.
But if you want to play devil's advocate,
Yeah.
then you need to listen.
The
suspect.
Okay, I listen to the suspect.
But you already know the answer.
No,
maybe you can better explain that.
No, I don't think so. But I mean, I just was going to say, like, I do think there's a flip side to it. I agree with you. It's from the labor and the precarization that have caused it are problematic in the extreme, but there are sort of some nice side effects about people having to experiment with other forms, like learning how to shoot film, learning how to shoot video, learning how to do whatever. I mean, data visualization, learning how to direct those kind of projects. I just think that there are certain kinds of recognition of a demanding audience too that wants visual content that can have an upside. So, and I do want to wonder, it's not entirely bad that people brand themselves?
It's not entirely bad, but you don't really advocate the position that our problem with the media is that we are not, we have not really accepted new technologies.
No, I don't.
You are not saying that.
I know,
All
no,
right.
but no, I don't
And then
mean
all right.
technology, but I mean people being asked to, required to express themselves across different platforms as opposed to just the traditional news stories. Like, I think there's a value to it. I do.
Yes, it is. But when you need to work more, when you need to learn more for less pay.
Right, the less pay part is the problem. The less resources is the problem. But the formal,
somehow different, yeah.
The formal
Yeah, but,
variety that people, I mean, I feel like in some ways personally and also with the people I know, it has expanded them from just, you write the usual magazine story, like, you know, it has beginning, you know, start with a profile, you know, it has a real form, news graph and a news story. I mean, now when I teach and also when I edit, I'm thinking, do you have any photo that you know, can you gather that? And so on the other side, because I management a little bit, I have to think, what are the multiple frames that we can be giving this story to make people click on it? You know?
I think it's horrible to be one-man show constantly. Like,
Yeah.
my experience now, when I was hired for Deutsche Welle, I had this small iPhone and I was a storyteller, one in front of that small camera. I was editing. I was like, what the fuck? Yeah. Like that's horrible perspective and position, because you can't be all that. That's that ideological mistake. That, like, if you go to 1 day or 2 day seminars on editing, that you will become a good editor. You won't.
Yeah.
Like, people
No, it's true.
do it for all of their lives.
But really, let me just finish it. It will be really brief. I mean, what's the problem with the cost cutting? From the perspective of the media management and media owners, it's probably desirable strategy. But from perspective of media audience, it's very problematic, because if you have a strike in a shipyard here in Rijeka, cost-cutting strategy will make that you are covering that from Zagreb, really. You will take journalists from your gastro part of the newspapers. You know, he was just writing about some shrimps with risotto, you know, and then we'll take. I'm not kidding. Really.
I'm hungry.
Ask anyone from the content factory, really, and he or she will be covering a strike at the shipyard here. Yeah. And imagine which sort of context, which sort of perspective we will consume with that content.
You mean to have the restaurant?
Strike with shrimps.
Well, you know, in some sort of ideal presentation of commercial media from that golden era of the past, we will have, you know, reporters on the ground.
And the restaurant critics.
Living here, you know, eating, drinking, sleeping with the strikers here, and they will be presenting their perspective, their context, their view on the problem, and we will be reading about that. And that's my problem with the cost cutting, and nothing else really. I mean, I'm kind of I don't read these news about, you know, people in strike. Like there are people who don't know which is good risotto with shrimps. They don't eat, you know, good food because we cannot support, and that's the reason we cannot support their strike. I mean, that perspective is something.
Striker that will tweet about it, and he would be relevant source of information.
I'm sort of bored with that perspective.
Sure.
No expertise, and I agree with you. Sorry, I just.
Yeah, thank you.
And if you
putting it in 140 characters, every day will strike you.
And if you
Everyone will believe him.
if you ask for perspective of the worker, of the Roma people, of the Serbian people, of gays, lesbians, transgender people, you need to search for their media if that exist, and you need to read it there, because you cannot read that in commercial media anymore. Full stop. I'm sorry.
Danica?
Even about, just to continue your point, even about if it's not, I mean, it is marginalized groups, but for instance, you know, when that Grenfell Tower big fire happened in London, the journalists of mainstream media and these influencers on social media that you mentioned found out that a guy from local community wrote a blog about how badly built those buildings are, but no one read his blog. So there are reporters on the ground, there are community kind of initiatives that are taking care of issues that the audience, the people care about. We just need to, as Milan said, search for it on transgender websites and people from disadvantaged backgrounds websites, what is really going on. But that's where we're coming back to the point that being out of touch as, in a way, elitistic profession. And I'm a journalist, so I know what the truth is. Then, until then, we will have a problem.
Okay, one of the main goals, ideological goals on journalistic schools is that you have to be objective, and that means that you will know the truth then. But when it comes to diversity medias, the medias who are in their ideology program saying that they are for diversities, different kind of diversities, doesn't matter, minority, something, can they be objective? What does it mean then to be really journalist?
I like to shock my students sometimes by saying, I don't believe in objectivity. But first of all, I believe in accuracy, but I think objectivity is sort of an impossible, it's like a platonic ideal. But I also think that there's another ideal here that I want to, which is intellectual honesty. And to me, that sometimes falls between what people would think of as advocacy and what people would think of objectivity. When we try to use a neutral headline about Murdoch or white nationalist or Trump, et cetera, or Brexit, that is not intellectually honest. It's following the rules, but that in itself is part of why we got here, right? So I think I'd like us to rethink when we talk about objectivity. I really would. And I do think that we need more voicey pieces, because I think that's where some of this intellectual honesty resides, and these individuals who's the kind of people that I've been recruiting for our project.
I don't believe in objectivity, and then I don't think that we as a media should be objective, but including as many and as diverse as we can would maybe provide that more inclusive point of view. So if I am a journalist coming from disadvantaged background, of course that I'm going to be very critical about structures of power and those who are getting rich and striving for profit. But I'm going to be honest about it. I am coming from disadvantaged background, and I really hate rich people. So then if you read my articles, you know where I'm coming from. But then including the articles of others and other point of views might kind of serve the justice better.
You as journalists have this bizarre responsibility to believe that you know what public interest is, right? So what the public interest is, and you were financing somebody who believed that he knows or she knows that public interest is that they know what that is, like, but that wasn't right, obviously, because they failed.
There was an interesting sort of pilot project we developed at the Ministry of Culture for funding non-profit journalism, really. It was really for unemployed journalists. They could apply with a freelance project to get a small grant, like monthly or 3-month paycheck to do certain research and to develop a story. And all they needed to present was really a synopsis of the story, what they would like to research, and a letter of intent of some editor of non-profit media that she will publish it eventually when that will be finished. So, and we were awarding these grants according to the, informed opinion of expert commission. We elected seven members commission on a public call, and they were all like academics, a respectable professional journalism in pension and so on, and they were really judging the projects, these synopses and so on. And 1 year we decided, all right, let's try something else. Let's try to invite the audience really to vote for these projects. We put out the names of the journalists from obvious reasons. And we presented just the story, just their stories on the website, and asked the audience just to vote. There was certain online mechanism to guarantee that they can't really cheat. I mean, the government agency really who takes care about this voters list, and they helped really about that, to protect the system that you cannot cheat. And you know what? But we asked our expert commission to judge simultaneously, really, and we expected that you will always here or there find the sort of approach that audience is stupid, audience likes like popular things, stories about popular people, singers. And,
Right.
You know that approach. And but after that pilot project was finished, when we looked at the result of the public, of the people's vote, popular vote, and the expert commission, it was practically identical. It was all the same. I mean, what I would like to say that that fear that if you let people to decide what they want to read, really, or watch or listen, that fear is not really so much grounded. Really.
What does it mean for you to pitch a story in your communities, in your journalistic communities? What does it mean to pitch something like Brexit and to believe that you are really going to report about something when you can't really enter the real structures who are actually deciding on some topics?
What do you, I'm a little confused. What do you mean? What real structures?
Like, you can't be in front of the White House and talk to, I don't know, his friends. You can't really do that when you're a non-profit.
Yeah.
But when you work for CBS or
Okay.
you can approach them because you'll be able to pay your dinner and listen to, I don't know, some real friends of a friend in a fancy bar. I'm talking this really specifically about this high politics.
High politics.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's, well, in some ways you can turn the disadvantage into, you can somewhat turn into an advantage in the sense that then you're reporting around. That's what we call it, write-arounds, where you report a story by talking to disgruntled former staffers, or people who have flipped, who were once Republicans and now Democrats. You know what I'm saying? There's like and that is also a nice aesthetic, because sometimes that produces, I don't do that kind of electoral politics, but when I have been trying to report on something and I wish I don't have access to the main subject, you can start to talk to the people they knew and kind of compose it, and it has a really interesting feeling, actually, as a piece, and sometimes it gets at like an alternative truth. So that's to me, that's the approach. That's the approach we have to take. I mean, I think there's also stuff we can find in unusual ways. Like we can, if we're looking at, for the early days of Brett Kavanaugh, people were, from left media, were getting the people who were in his high school class to send their yearbooks to him. So like yearbooks to the writer, you know, so that's like one thing that, you know, so that's creative, right? You're not gonna be able to interview Brett Kavanaugh, who was, you know, the Supreme Court, the whole, but you're gonna be able to get this sort of incredible firsthand materials from people who are now very energized to fight. So, you know, where it was once they were just sort of standard issue Democrats who wouldn't want to send any, you know, media to a left journalist, you know what I mean? That like, they felt like that wasn't their role. Now they're eagerly, you know, the second you have a critical piece that you want to write about anyone in power, and you're trying to find materials about their youth, which has become a whole thing. People love to do this now, post-Kavanaugh. You know, because they're power elite, this is to Mark's projects, you know, you'll be able to find the private school classmate, the yearbook, and then you'll get this whole other story. I'll give you an example. You know, Barr, the Attorney General, when he was giving his testimony, I very quickly discovered that he was the headmaster of a famous New York private school in the 70s, in which one of the math teacher was Jeffrey Epstein. I kid you not. I feel like no one else had found this, but like because I knew this private school, I grew up in New York City, I knew people who went to it, I was able to get this yearbook with pictures of Barr and Epstein like that. I mean, I wasn't even writing anything, but I posted it on Facebook, and then really shortly after it became like a story, yeah.
Danica, you were reporting on Brexit, and you're a minority in the UK. Mm-hmm. You were informed with your own experience, and what was that like to become? In Serbia, you were different kind of a minority. You were intellectual minority, in a sense that you were aware of the political system in a different way, and you were in minority in that period. But then you actually became a political minority, and now you are reporting on Brexit.
Yeah. I have an interesting story about the Brexit, and that is part of what I did with my reporting. Because, first of all, you're right, no one believed. You know, no one believed that such a thing will happen. It's such a deconstruction of the game. But I had a friend who voted for Brexit. He was a very dear friend to me. And I'm an immigrant there. He is coming from North England, Carlisle, close to the Scottish border. So very white, very working class. He was gay, so he was minority, moved to London to escape this narrative, but still he voted for Brexit and was arguing very hardly that Brexit should be our choice. So the morning when the thing happened, I was thinking, I can quote all these media experts, political analysts, I have to quote someone who actually did it, who voted for Brexit. So I went to see him. I walked in and said, how could you? You voted for me to be thrown out of this country. And he said, absolutely not. I didn't vote against migrants. I just want all this money that we are sending to the European Union to stay here because I lost job and I really need better social services. Just realized he thinks that austerity measures introduced by the Tory government are actually European Union trap, and he was thinking that because he was sitting in front of the TV watching all these media reports, and suddenly I realized that now the damage has been done. They are not against migration, they are not all right-wing, they're actually voting against the financial crisis austerity measures. They're voting against the economical system. But, you know, it made me realize that on the morning after Brexit. I did quote that in my Serbian report. I don't know how Serbian audience cared about that, but yeah.
And it's funny the way they funneled all the critiques that were accurate of the EU. They just absorbed them into this monstrous. Absolutely. Yeah. And so there was a kernel of something sensible. You know, like, there's a kernel of something sensible in Trump's tariffs, you know, and the fear of outsourcing jobs. You know, there's a kernel of something that's like left labor in that even, but it's just been taken to this. But so that's the thing, like, it's people like your friend who are, that scares me, actually.
Let's talk honestly, that's your syntagma. How many times have you failed as journalist in representation?
What does it fail, and failed in what sense?
Failed in the sense that you actually
Use fake news.
that you have, yeah, that you have an information that you checked it and then you failed it. It was actually a fake news. Can we talk that?
Yeah, that hasn't happened to me. No, really, but it's happened to.
But you do know friend of a friend.
Friend of. No, but I mean, one of the reasons, like, so this is a crucial thing about cost cutting. There's now no fact checking in most publications, and to me, fact checking is a pillar of. It was crucial. I was a fact checker when that was how I started out, and I don't know if you have this here. But there was a whole layer of people who checked facts for the reporter who were different from the reporter. And even in, you know, the times they used to have that, I think now it's like one person, but there used to be two people. And I think that's one of the reasons I should say probably never have had those slip-ups, because I've had fact-checking. In my organization, I have a fact-checker who will check everybody's story, a different person.
Is it easier to check that when you work for non-profit media who doesn't have the idea of daily reporting, because you can't?
Yeah, for sure.
Report?
Easier.
So it's easier to be a smart journalist.
Smaller mass of, but I mean, the thing is, because we're working with so many people, and many of them are not, as I said, conforming to social norms in the same way. Like, they haven't been trained in a newspaper necessarily. They may be living in a tent in Alaska. You know, like, we want to check that. And so I think that that's the major thing, is to reintroduce that. If I was Zuckerberg, I would do like a fact-checking project. I feel like a lot of these tech people, when they're putting money into journalism, it would, because of the level of the falsity, to have a fact-checking project would be a very useful PR strategy for them. Yeah.
Danica, what's your experience?
I think I failed in terms of not including when I could have included more voices. For instance, there's that trick, you know, look at my notebook. Okay, let's count. How many female experts I have? Wow, I don't have that many. So why I don't have? Because I was lazy to find actually female experts amongst, you know, academics or experts. Because it's easier for me to just,
Right.
So that's my failure. But yeah.
So what I do with my students with this, and this is a strategy if anybody teaches journalism, is I say, please find a junior female academic to interview as your experts. So I sort of make them not interview the Oxford Don or the, you know, Harvard, the guy who's, I mean, not, I think part of the problem in journalism, actually, in terms of that's a whole other issue, but what we see as experts has a confirmation bias. So when, and you're working very fast, you want, it's just for something really basic, like, you know, a stat, you know, or just a quote to cap off your story. People will very quickly, they'll call the person who's interviewed most, and that person is usually an older white man. So, but it was good training for the students, because they all started now having these junior academics in every story. And I've sort of been, at female academics, and I've been forcing all my friends, it's almost like a game, like an obstruction, like try to get a junior academic into your piece. Female, yeah, female.
I'm afraid that the European Union's policy their so-called war against fake news is completely tragically wrong. I mean, it's completely wrong understanding of the problem of the media, of course, and developed tragically failed policies from that standpoint. We hear several months ago we had the huge drama in Croatian government when Minister of Culture presented that our main priority is tackling the fake news, and there was a special advisor to to the government, to the prime minister, that black swan guy talking about, special war from the kids, from the Tito Veles, from Macedonia against informed citizenship and so on and so on. I mean, that position, they are just joining European Union's campaigns. That position is so wrong. I cannot underline that more because, the false reporting, propaganda, commercial interest, they existed, from the beginnings of the journalism, from the beginning of the media.
Yeah, yellow journalism.
Yes, that was, that was always there. But you have a quality, normal, professional journalism as a counterbalance. Now, when you have lost the sources of funding, you don't have that balance. You are left with a commercial interest, with a hidden, not so hidden really, advertising. They call it native advertising, and they brag about it, how good they are in native advertising. What we are talking about? And
journalists work for agencies now.
Yeah, and we have the governments who are at the same time. They say they will fight the fake news on the internet until their last drop of blood, and at the same time they are killing they are stopping the small funding for professional journalism. That's really hysterical situation. Where we even had that Minister of Culture, radical right-winger, who said that his action against non-profit journalism here in Croatia, he called that action using the name of the Luftwaffe offensive during the World War II against partisans and Marshal Tito at the time hiding in Drvar, in city of Drvar, in town of Drvar in Bosnia and Herzegovina. You remember that the title of that German action in the war that was the Konichev skok, the jump of the horse, and they used the same wording as a title of his policy against non-profit media. Of course, Nazis, they lost in that action in 1994 in town of Drvar in Bosnia and Herzegovina. But it doesn't matter, that shows that, that really shows their frustration, really, the sources of their frustration on the right wing. But it's that sort of imagination, it speaks for itself, I believe.
Okay, we are coming to an end of this conversation. I want you to share your beliefs and feelings on where journalism is going. You can be very spiritual.
Thank you, Oprah.
Because you can't be objective. You can't be objective. Then you can ask whatever you want, and then please do. Yeah.
Yes, I have one question for Danica and for Alissa. You're in Guardian, right? You have articles for Guardian, and you're working on Brexit. Someone in this panel, sorry, my name is Nico.
Okay, hi.
Someone in this panel have a point about losing the war on the Brexit. So that mainstream media lose the war on Brexit. Yesterday, I read in the Guardian article. Before 40 years, Great Britain have a referendum about coming in the European Union. For 40 years. There is just one daily newspaper, one magazine, who is Eurosceptic against the European Union. I think before 3 years, there is just one magazine or daily newspaper for the European Union, and that's Guardian. So this is not a question, I want your comment. You said before, I don't know, from the beginning of this panel, that we are responsible. And I think that's true. We, the journalists, are responsible for that. Not the editors, not the, I don't know, Robert or anyone. I want your comment. I think you are right. The only way is through the mainstream media, our voice, but how? I need that explanation or advice. How?
I think that this kind of fighting a war, because liberal media think they're in the war with Brexiteers, and that's wrong, because my friend had every right to write for Brexit, and quite honestly, I think, you know, that we need to respect people who think differently. But now Guardian and BBC, they can't let go, just can't let go. They can't imagine that their little world or middle-class, Oxford, Cambridge educated elite is going to be out of EU. So now the problem is, I believe, that journalists weren't closer to the voters, to the communities. And in other words, whether politically something is correct or in our favor or stands on the same side as we are, but how today's world, let's say climate change, reflects on the community and ordinary people. Whether they will have floods in Cumbria, in north of England. Well, journalists sitting around Westminster can't know that because they will not to Cumbria, but local journalists who were reporting for local newspapers are all out of job and probably went to local PR agency. So I think your comment is really
Spot on.
it shows, it's about the historical change, you know, it shows actually why the Guardian is fighting so hard for Britain to stay in the EU and why they hate Corbyn, because Corbyn didn't come out and say, well, let's stay. So, but the reporting about it needs to be more in depth to see the reasons and what a vision, and most importantly, I believe the future, that's the answer to your question. The future of journalism is, I believe, in a community, local, non-for-profit, if you like, Milan, as a campaign, information that serves the people and serves the public. If it's public interest, it doesn't need to be national public interest, but you know, here in Rijeka, we could have a media outlet who would follow this conference and report and know what's happening and what happened yesterday in front of the exhibition, and that is our little world, and we don't have to care about, that is up to debate. But I think we need to go back to the community.
Yeah, and this is part of, I don't know if you were at my talk an hour ago, but you were out there. But I was just saying that the news deserts are now throughout the US, and they almost track perfectly with red states. So these are the places that have no local, very little local news, and what they have is skeleton crew of newspapers. A lot of people still watch TV, but the local TVs are also underfunded. And so what I'm doing with On the Ground, which was a series that it runs in The Guardian, and then it also runs in local papers, is all stuff around inequality by local writers. So I'm trying to like grow local writers in these places who then also publish with The Guardian and the local newspaper, which is often, if it has a politics, it's conservative, right? But because it's content that's about their area, you know, it's about rural like hospitals in the countryside closing, for instance, in North Carolina. This is local. I didn't know about it. It's happening. This guy did a beautiful long form piece, very moving. It was, yeah, it ran in like I forget, the Charlottesville paper and, Charlotte, North Carolina paper, and then also ran in the Guardian. So that's one way to do it. And it's not just us. ProPublica is now supporting local newsrooms. They have a huge, and the stuff that's coming out is amazing. Something like 40% of Alaskan towns don't have police forces, and they're all indigenous Alaskan towns. It was a remarkable project they did. And there's plenty of others. I mean, when I went to this convening of all these different nonprofits, as I said earlier, there's something called Report for America that's sending people to all these places. I think there's another project, which was actually something I wanted to do, which is to try to hire city hall reporters in red state towns and cities, because they don't have local reporters that are, at all reporting to people about their needs. So that's where we have to go. And then I think we have to write a version that does reach the blue state, like the Guardian reader, because we need to know too. Like, I'm gonna say us as in, it's not just the community that needs to know. We need to know those stories to understand the country we're living in, the countries.
Only I think now that it will be fair to make the point that your experience and my experience coming from the West is completely different than what's going on here.
Oh yeah, so please, tell me.
Here, you would have this support, I presume, although I argue now, you would have a support for non-for-profit local media news outlets only if it's coming from the EU funds or some sort of Marshall Plan funds. So you need to play by the rule and to be kind of with the big donors. Otherwise, I don't think there is kind of public interest, there is enough public interest to support those kind of initiatives that are local. Maybe I'm wrong.
We don't
Maybe
know
that's
what public interest is.
Yeah, no, it's like kind of, you know, where the funds are coming from when we are talking about Croatia or Bosnia or...
Like, so what is I just have a question for people here. Like, what is the reporting on the budding nationalist movements here? What does it look like?
It's very cosmetic. It comes from our best columnists. They're judging it, and you have all this feeling that when it comes to mainstream and, of course, left-wing non-profit media, they're judging it and...
Disgust. It's sort of a
disgust. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
But that doesn't obviously influence the ones who are producing nationalism.
Right.
So the impact...
Do they have access to those scenes and those worlds? Do reporters?
Of course, yeah. We live in a small village called the state.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for participating in this panel. I hope it wasn't boring for all of you. If you still have questions, you can ask them. If you don't, go and have a lunch, and we'll meet here again at 2:30, talking about theater, diversity, everything fun with Olga Dimitrijević and Nat.